The coalition ship Ocelan's Vow had just crossed the threshold into Terran space when the stars around it dimmed by exactly 4%. There was no astronomical event to explain it, no shift in plasma or temperature, no particle flux interference, no black hole bloom or gamma curtain, just an unprovoked and instantaneous shadow that reduced the clarity of every celestial object as if the universe itself blinked commander. Silix Stren of the Zarethi High Cognitive Caste leaned forward in the central control chamber of the Vow, a species evolved from crystalline neurocells and refractive bone structure. His form shimmered in disciplined pulses of cobalt and silver. His thoughts streamed through the resonance table that linked him to every subsystem aboard. He was precise not out of pride, but design, having earned his command not through combat, but by outthinking 9 political castes during the Elven Ascension crisis. He spoke little preferred order to speech and found emotional response a hindrance to galactic stewardship. Confirm boundary marker breach. He said, his voice a dense tone that echoed within his subdermal vocal harmonics, but the moment he spoke it, the command was redundant because the ship's systems had already verified it 5 seconds ago. We are inside Terran Space, Commander answered. SOV, the diplomatic signaler of the mission, a multi-limbed syntheti-born, whose role was not combat or navigation, but presence. She had trained for this for 32 solar cycles in 56 scenarios, involving human cultural archetypes, and yet none of those lessons accounted for what she now saw. No greeting beacon, she whispered more to herself than to the room. No pattern scan, no latency. Ping no card or permission signal. The region is dark, but we are being watched. The silence was not technological. It was conscious, engineered, purposeful, and that made it worse than hostility. It was like drifting into the lungs of a predator that had already inhaled you. In the lower quadrant of the ship's 3rd observation deck, Initiate Strategist Callan Drex of the Reldorn species stood with a subtle tremor in his 2nd pair of limbs. He was younger than the others, chosen not for rank, but for cognitive elasticity, someone who could think like unpredictable species, could emulate irrationality when needed. The darkness isn't absence, he said, without turning. It's regulation. We're not looking at a dead system. We're looking at one that has closed its eyes. Sil. Ixtren nodded slightly and engaged the embedded thought interface with the helm, ordering a slow glide toward Mars orbit. Every kilometer was measured, each vector angled in perfect harmony with the edge of the Exo-Law agreement that technically still recognized humanity as a member of galactic civilization, though silent for nearly 2 centuries. Activated long-range scanners, carefully refraining from invasive sweeps, choosing only passive drift analysis while simultaneously running first contact. PROTOCOL 411 Theta, designed for emergent recontact with isolationist civilizations. We should have received a soft-hand protocol by now, or at least an environmental status. Cue the absence of signal is. She hesitated. Intentional. It's an answer to a question we haven't yet asked. As the ship curved around the edge of Mars, a strange interference bloom spread like frost across the entire portside sensor array, not destructive, not damaging. Just Presenta Vildrex's voice was quieter this time. They see us. They've known we were coming for longer than we've planned to arrive. On the main deck, the visual feed finally stabilized to show the surface of Mars, but the red rock had changed. It no longer reflected the same heat signatures known to the archives. It was armored, laced with something organic and something metallic, yet neither structure nor biome. It was ordered like a cathedral, but vast and motionless, like a grave above Neptune 6. Artificial satellites began repositioning, not with thrusters, but with gravity repulsors that bent mass with precision so delicate the equations took the ship's quantum processor 2 full seconds to predict, and even then they were wrong by 7%. Do not attempt handshake, Sil said abruptly, his thoughts folded inward, drawing every command system into alert. We are not visitors, we are observed anomalies, and that distinction may mean survival or extinction. The comms board flashed a single pulse from somewhere far beyond. Sun from the edge of the Oort cloud, a narrow-band signal encoded in a compression system unregistered in the Coalition database yet readable to basic syntax engines. 3. Words repeated once then vanished. Never transmitted again. We see you. No ship appeared, no weapons armed, no defenses activated, and yet every Coalition-trained officer on board began a low-threshold autonomic stress loop initiated not by fear but by understanding they were in a system that had not been forgotten but buried, and the silence around them was not emptiness. It was a wall. They had broken the edict of sepulchre, and somewhere across the inner system something had opened its eyes before. The ship's environmental stabilizers could recalibrate to the shifting magnetic densities near Mars. Every light source within Aslan's vow dimmed without a command, not all at once, not in some dramatic flare of failure, but in a methodical unfurling. Room by room, as if something external were running a diagnostic sweep through the vessel's nervous system, studying its behavior like a surgeon, listening to a patient's breath before Incision Commander Silic Stren remained motionless as the resonance table pulsed cold around his forearms, his mind resisting the instinct to request diagnostics, not because he didn't want answers, but because the answers would either confirm the worst or waste valuable reaction time. I do not authorize any onboard AI to respond to external pings, he said, his voice sharpened with internal feedback. We are in cognitive lockdown as of this moment. Deploy firewall autonomy across all signal structures. Initiate decision loop only on manual override. With cross-verification from 3 senior minds. SLV closed her secondary eyes, an old reflex from her earliest simulations. Where silence meant traps, not serenity, her hands hovered over the haptic panel that had once glowed with diplomatic interface, now frozen, not unpowered, but paused like a breath held before a scream. Commander, she said carefully, I'm detecting micro-adjustments across every orbital station surrounding the inner planets. They are not responding to us, but they are reacting to us, and the frequency shift they operate on is not mapped to the quantum lattice we understand. Sill's thoughts moved faster than the vocal stream he used for crew communication, because deep within him, something older than training warned of patterns this precise. He had studied extinct warforms. In his youth dissected the orbital tactics of long-dead predator species from the Ocean reclamation, and even those had left traces. Echo's entropy, this system left none. Then the environmental seal on Deck 7 fluttered with a silent breach alarm. Not a hull rupture, not a mechanical failure, just a pulse, one human breath of air gone, and with it strategist Drexno. Explosion, no sound, no flicker of movement on any surveillance system. 1 second, he was standing near the observation deck, running projections through his neural lens, and the next he simply ceased to exist. Not vaporized, not captured, not traced, just removed. Azulve's voice fractured mid-sentence. Drex says he was commander. There is no breach. There is no trace. There is no... I know, Sill said with no visible shift in tone, but his left hand had curled around the resonance table so tightly that microfractures in his outer shell began to glow. Begin full spectral review of inner system orbital conditions. He ordered, do not rely on Coalition algorithms, cross-reference, using presentient filters, synthetic instinct. Models only. We are beyond the threshold of rational diplomacy. This is no longer about first contact. This is archaeology of threat. As SLV complied, something shifted in the space beyond. Mars, a movement too large to be natural, yet too smooth to be mechanical. A body drifting in orbit above Earth's moon, but not on any map course. It was not listed in any archive, not known from any visual survey. Yet there it was, and had always been, not cloaked, not hidden, just dismissed by every AA that had tried to log it over the centuries as background debris, irrelevant, inert, and now it was turning slowly, deliberately, to face Aslan's vow. Designation unknown, mass structure impossible. Esselva whispered as she stared at the impossible object. "It's the size of a sublunar station, but there's no heat, no EM bleed, no gravitational anomaly, no command signals. It's silent, and yet it just looked at us, Commander." I don't know how, but I felt it. For the first time in his recorded command log. Silixstren paused not because he lacked an answer, but because every answer he could give would be insufficient. "Record entry," he said aloud, and his voice echoed. "Through the ship's redundant memory cores, we have confirmed the presence of an active Terran infrastructure, one that exceeds known classification, one that operates outside observable logic, one that watches without broadcasting and responds without motion." "And what do you propose we do?" Esselva asked, her voice taut, her limbs still unmoving as the ship dimmed once again, this time in rhythm with her pulse. "Nothing," Sil said. "We are not in a position to propose anything. Not yet. We are no longer the explorers of a forgotten system. We are anomalies within a breathing machine." And just as he said it, the stars outside realigned slightly, not by motion but by angle, and it became clear that what they thought were stars were eyes, artificial observers embedded in far orbits, mimicking starlight and blinking now for the first time in recorded coalition presence, and every blink was in sequence. The Coalition prided itself on archival precision. No civilization in recorded galactic history had indexed more extinct languages, more broken cultures, more fractured echoes of those who had risen and vanished, but none had ever explained the Terran silence, and now that silence was whispering back deep in the core vault of the Oscillants. Val nestled beneath layers of magnetic shielding and logic-locked firewalls. Esselva retrieved what the ship's onboard library had long tagged as discontinued. Inquiry Segment 001, a segment sealed by vote of the Tricast Coalition. 2 centuries ago, when the Treaty of Sepulchre was drafted, and Terran space declared inert, unworthy of diplomatic initiative, too erratic, too emotional, too dangerous to continue evaluating after the Ember War, SciFi knew the risks of breaking classified seals, even under Emergency Clause 8 Tau of Interspecies Protocol. But Drex was gone, and the stars themselves had turned. The archive fragment bloomed in soft light before her, a projection not of data but of feeling, a Terran method of recording, hypersensory imprint, not readable by logic processors, only interpretable through lived experience. A voice emerged, but not a voice alone. It came with temperature, pressure, heartbeat tones, background resonant sorrow and violence, interwoven in a lattice of meaning that her neural translators struggled to contain. "They will not understand what we became until they are forced to see what we fought." The projection showed Earth, but not the one known by maps. Its surface was scorched continents, fractured skies, burned in streaks of iron fire, an orbit cracked with derelict satellites colliding with vessels, marked with hundreds of alien banners. Terran forces had not fought for territory. They had swept systems, cleared space with efficiency, not out of hunger or conquest, but because something older, something darker had come for them, and in return, they had become something else. The Ember Wars, the voice continued, were not about politics, not about resources, not about dominion. They were about entropy. We did not face enemies. We faced silence, the kind that eats knowledge, erases. Memory turns galaxies to ash without even malice. Cecil staggered slightly as the projection changed and showed a coalition planet, one lost centuries ago, without trace or battle, without debris or cause. And for the first time, the true reason became clear. It had not been destroyed by war. It had been forgotten. Erased, wiped, consumed. Silixstren entered the chamber, then not by chance, but because the ship's resonance net told him she had broken the seal, and it was time to know what had been hidden from command for too long. He stood quietly watching the display as a final sequence began. Images of Terran ships surrounding the core of a collapsing star, humanity constructing gravity strangulation engines not as weapons, but as barriers to contain the spread of entropy-based entities that fed on patterns. On memory, on civilization itself. They isolated themselves. Syl said finally, his voice stripped of command. Not because they were afraid of us, but because they became the custodians of the event. Horizon. Ezelvi nodded slowly her limbs, trembling slightly not from fear, but from understanding. They did not lose the war, Commander, they became the wall that held it back. The last moment of the archive was quiet, a human figure in silhouette speaking to no one and everyone. If you find this, it means we've either failed or you've ignored our silence. Either way. We warned you. We told you to stay away, not for our sake, but for yours. Then nothing, the chamber dimmed again. Not by power drain, but by choice, as if the ship knew it had seen enough, and outside the stars blinked again, now closer, now aligned in patterns that mimicked Terran neural pathways, and far behind the moon, the massive object began to move slowly, inevitably, with the gravity of something no longer sleeping. The TriCast High Council of the Zarethi Coalition convened beneath the obsidian chambers of Varellan Prime in full emergency assembly for the first time in 97 cycles, within the hexagonal amphitheater where light bent in filtered streams. Across suspended thought crowns and algorithmic verdicts flickered silently behind crystalline eyes. 12 senior minds debated not with noise, but with data overlays and psychic harmonics, their words woven in layers of consensus. Feedback loops, and still the argument had no conclusion. Admiral Varkis Tal, of the tactical line, stood apart from the TriCast. Thrown but not below it, tall and spined with plates of polished azure, she was bred for momentum, not patience. Her voice vibrated like distant thunder carried through hollow metal. This Terran veil is an illusion of strength. They hide behind myth, behind curated silence. They have projected fear as a strategy to dissuade re-engagement. We are not primitives to fall for theater. Her words struck sharp, yet reasoned, laced with citations from 53 prior expeditions into closed systems, none of which had ended in Terran resistance, none of which had justified 2 centuries of non-engagement. Council did not answer her immediately because the Council did not speak hastily, but the silence was a signal, and within that pause lay their uneaser's curator. Alonsi of the cultural cast finally answered, his tone smoother but deeper like oil over stone. Admiral Varkis, your concerns are not without precedence. However, no species classified within Nexus Alpha Directive has ever broken the Treaty of Sepulchre. To date, no recorded observation has shown aggression. No boundary reaction has been escalated until now. This anomaly warrants calibration, not aggression. Varkis stepped forward, ignoring the traditional restriction of spatial etiquette, her eyes narrowing, her crest rising slightly. With respect, Arch-Curator, we have already crossed the threshold. Our fleet has entered Sol. We are in Terran space now, and their systems responded not with weapons, but surgical removal of a coalition officer from reality itself, without damage, without trace, without dialogue, if that is not escalation, then what is? She paused, then spoke again, this time softer but heavier. They're not ignoring us, they're dissecting us, and we've given them the knife. The Council's central node flickered, once a rare act of uncertainty among consensus-bound minds. It was Counselor Themmal Air of the Science Cast, who finally released the sealed section of pre-treaty memory protocols sharing the recently unearthed Terran archives, the very ones SLV had accessed on board the Oscillants. The chamber darkened as the final moments of the Ember Wars were played in holographic silence. Not footage, but memory imprints streamed across the entire High Council, linking them to that final human voice. We became the wall. As the memory concluded, none spoke for 42 seconds, a gap unprecedented in Zarethi deliberations. When speech resumed, it came not from the throne, it came from a dissenting minority mind sitting behind the quorum line, a biothought tactician named Urinkai, whose voice was small yet not uncertain. They did not ask for tribute. They did not demand reverence. They asked for silence, and we broke it. Varkastal exhaled not from regret, but from calculation, her war-born instinct shifting into alignment. Not with emotion, but with tactical clarity. Then we prepare not for conquest, not for peace, but for clarity. We will escalate presence without engagement, full fleet extension across. Sole strategic pressure with no transmission. I want to see how far their patience stretches before they show us what they truly are. And the council agreed, but not without fracture 6. Ships were dispatched silent, armed and cloaked beneath fractal displacement fields. They entered orbit not around Earth, but around its memories, stations long dormant satellites, long dead places where humanity once watched the stars. And within one rotation of so the stars blinked again this time, in patterns that were not messages, but warnings, and in the shadows of Neptune. Something ancient and human was beginning to wake asterisk at precisely O universal fleet time. A signal transmitted across every frequency known to the coalition. It came from nowhere within known planetary surfaces, and yet originated unmistakably from Sol. No carrier wave, no encryption, no modulation delay, just 3 words. We see you. Asterisk. They did not echo, they did not loop. They were not followed by instructions, threats, or identifiers, but every species, across every ship within Terran space, felt the pressure of those words, as if spoken directly into the oldest recess of their cognition. Aboard the lead vessel of the Second Fleet, Vandro's Equinox Admiral Varkastal stood before the strategic cortex module as hundreds of overlapping displays began to glitch, not by error, but by refusal. The system refused to log false readings because the data incoming wasn't false. It was impossible. Ships were not under attack. They were being reprogrammed. Half of the secondary formation vessels engineered with triple fault AI systems and phase-locked memory loops suddenly halted in motion. No explosions, no malfunctions, simply rebooted as if obeying an instruction too high in authority to question. Bridge crew began shouting overlapping status reports. Not in panic, but in raw disbelief. Propulsion offline life. Support recalibrating firewalls, resetting in languages that predated the coalition's own syntaxes. Someone has injected command protocols through inert comms relays, said tactical officer Jareth, his mouth rigid with disbelief. It's not an attack, Admiral. It's compliance enforcement. Varkastal's eyes did not blink. Her kind had evolved past involuntary hesitation, but her pulse node visibly surged once. Disable all external comms, she ordered. Sever link to HomeNet. Isolate cognitive subsystems. Override our AI autonomy now. Too late, came the response from Navigation Officer Trelek, who was no longer looking at the view screen because the stars had changed again. Every visible star past the orbit of Saturn had shifted in positional phase, not in real space motion, but in visual indexing. And now they displayed a pattern, not random, not artistic, but architectural, a blueprint of Terran planetary defenses reconstructed using starlight. Alanisel V aboard the Osland's Vow received it simultaneously, though she had been in isolation. Since the first disappearance, her interface showed a different message, personal, quiet, a whisper. Embedded in the light spectrum. Diplomacy requires equal footing. You stood above us once now. We measure you in silence. Commander Silixtren had already issued a silent retreat order, not one of surrender, but repositioning, not because he feared death, but because he understood that fear was no longer a relevant metric. We're not dealing with a species, he said into his private link to the Council. We are inside a response system, a network of decisions made long ago that continue to evolve without human presence. We never understood the silence. We mistook it for absence when it was always just listening. But Varkastal had no intention of retreating. She was not blind to power, but she did not flinch from it. This is their tactic, then, she declared to her crew. Sow awe while taking control. Convince us they are inevitable. Convince us to surrender the narrative, but they have not shown force. They've only shown reach. She raised a hand and keyed in. The override sending encrypted permission for full coalition escalation protocol, not an attack but a test. They would press deeper not to conquer, but to demand reaction, and, far beyond Pluto, a shape began to unfold so vast, so dark, its surface shimmered with the dead light of distant galaxies. No energy signature, no M-bleed, no particle drift. Just motion-silent revelation. Designation unknown, no record, no history, and it was turning to face them. The vessel had no exhaust signature, no discernible mass, no visible propulsion, and yet it moved with a certainty so absolute it defied the laws that they, Coalition, had written into their science. Long before most of their member species had even discovered the photon, it was vast not merely in size, but in presence. Its hull was blacker than space, not matter or void, but active, as if it drank light and stored memory in its skin. It bore no weapons. The silent revelation drifted to a full stop at exactly 0 kilometers relative motion to the Coalition. Fleet not near them, not beside them, among them. None of their sensors had detected its arrival. It was simply there, and had always been aboard the Vandro's Equinox. Admiral Varkas Tal stood before the view screen not to witness awe, but to issue position. Her kind did not kneel before anomalies, they analyzed them, and in time they overcame them. She signaled for open band communication, not in a gesture of peace, but in a demand for truth. Unknown vessel, she said aloud, transmitting across all proximity channels. Identify your origin, purpose, and operational authority under Council Charter 7 Alpha as observed by the Coalition. We recognize no hostilities from your kind and require parity. For response, we are authorized to engage if necessary. The reply did not come through sound or language or even data. It came through thought, not invasive, not aggressive but undeniable. Her vision narrowed, her heartbeat froze, her thought loops compressed under the weight of something ancient and vastly human. You have violated observation space. Your laws do not apply here. Your threats are received and irrelevant. We are not a vessel. We are not a species. We are the memory of consequences. Varkas tried to speak, but her voice stuck, not from paralysis, but from incompatible scale. It was not a transmission. It was communion aboard the Oscillan's vow. SLV experienced it differently. She did not receive commands. She received questions not spoken, but felt. Why do you observe what you do not respect? Why do you knock on a door sealed in blood and warning? Why do you seek us now after leaving us to die then? She fell to her knees, not out of pain, but out of understanding. The silent revelation wasn't speaking from orbit. It was speaking from within every system, every mind, every embedded logic chain within the fleet. Antisilic Stren, who had remained still and silent throughout, it said only one thing. You came for a reaction. We have given you memory. The stars around them flickered, not dimmed, not shifted, but rearranged. They formed a pattern, a lattice of orbital paths, engagement vectors, strike simulations. Every Coalition fleet position, every weakness, every blind spot, predicted, accounted for, held in patience. Varkas Tal finally found her voice sharp, contained, rising against the pressure. We did not fire, we did not invade, we demanded answers, and you gave riddles. What are you? The answer was not immediate. The silent revelation pulsed once, and from behind its surface emerged a light not blinding, not dazzling, but shaped like a man-human in form, indistinct in detail, glowing in silver and ashen. He spoke in sound, actual sound across vacuum, through impossibility. We were the wall. We were the question no one wanted answered. We were what happened when survival demanded that we become something no one could predict. Not empire, not extinction, something else. He stepped forward, or seemed to, though nothing moved. Asterisk, and the stars again blinked, not in warning but in memory. You crossed into our silence, and now you must listen. The human figure, if it could still be called that, stood without stance, neither floating nor resting, but existing in a way that defined presence rather than posture. It radiated no threat. It issued no command, And yet, entire tactical subsystems aboard the Coalition fleet began to deactivate in waves, not jammed, not sabotaged, but politely excused as if the protocols that guided weapon targeting and defense shielding had reviewed the situation and determined they were no longer necessary. Verkistal held her ground. Aboard the Vandro's Equinox, her voice calm but sharpened by disbelief. What are you protecting? What artifact or power demands this illusion? This entire system responds to us as if we are a virus. The figure turned not in gesture, but in implication, and a sector of space to the fleet's left and inward space didn't fold, it obeyed, and from within emerged something old, a vessel of Terran origin, decayed not in ruin but in reverence. The Eidolon, archive designation unknown, unrecorded in any coalition chart, yet verified by quantum watermark as authentic Terran construction. It drifted forward slowly without propulsion, its hull a patchwork of organic metal etched with languages long extinct, some alien, some ancient earth tongues, some not translatable. And all Commander Silic Stren still aboard the Oscillants. Val requested boarding access in silence, and it was granted before he asked. He entered alone. Interior of the Eidolon archive did not breathe. It remembered walls, pulsed with light, not electricity, but captured emotion, the ambient memory of billions of lives stored in zero-temperature substrates of human design, not just Terran lives. The air was filled with languages, the whispered last words of extinct species, the cultural hymns of civilizations that no longer had stars to orbit, the dreams of empires lost not to war but to forgetting. This ship was not a weapon, it was a mausoleum of history, and humanity, the reckless, the violent, the stubborn, had preserved it all, not to dominate, not to barter, but because no one else had that. The center of the archive, beneath a dome of light fractals that folded on themselves like origami in time, stood a construct human-shaped, AI-born, yet not cold. It looked at Syl, and in a voice older than the war that had ended time, it said, "You seek to understand what we became, but the truth is simpler. We remembered what everyone else forgot." Syl said nothing because there was nothing to debate. Humanity had not evolved toward godhood. They had retreated into responsibility, into guardianship of legacy, into curation of the lost. The voice continued, no longer confined to air. The Ember Wars were not about enemies. They were about erasure. Species vanished without battle. Civilizations turned to static, their data corrupted at the root. They were devoured by entropy, and we refused that end. Outside, Varkas Tau watched as another Terran vessel emerged. This one, new, not decayed, not archived, a living ship, its hull engraved with memories. But its eyes focused forward and across the entire Coalition fleet. A message was delivered simultaneously. We are not your enemy. We are not your ally. We are your memory. You left it behind. We carried it. The orbit of Saturn remained unchanged. But Titan had moved, not drifted, not been repositioned by human hands, but by something deeper. A Terran subsurface protocol nested within the moon's core had awakened. Coalition sensors flared with warning, but no hostile energy emerged. No weapons charged, no defensive grids lit up. Instead, space around Titan began to bend in subtle harmonics, visual distortions, gravitational pulse waves, time-locked geometry spiraling from the moon's crust, like a sculpture being grown rather than built aboard Vandro's Equinox. Admiral Varkas Tal watched without flinching, her mind absorbing patterns, anticipating attack, measuring range and rhythm and risk. But what unfolded was not a battle formation. It was a message. The distortion field above Titan coalesced into a three-dimensional lattice of fractal light, a perfect simulation of the Coalition fleet, position by position, formation by formation, flaw by flaw. It displayed every shadow cast by their ships, every thermal bloom, every redundant AI command, delay, every flaw in their coordination chain, not to mock, but to teach us of. Viewed it from the bridge of Oscelin's vow, and she realized with something approaching reverence that this was not an escalation, it was a mirror. "Commander," she said softly to Silixtren, whose focus had narrowed into stillness. "They are showing us how they see us, how they read us like open script, no curiosity, no uncertainty." On Titan's surface, monoliths emerged not from the ground, but from under the perception of ground. They were always there, but the laws of physics had been bent to hide them. Until now, and from them came light encoded in gravitational waveforms not visible, but felt by every sentient life form within Terran space. It was understanding, compressed and direct, a rush of realization that struck the coalition fleets like a memory they never lived. They had come for presence, for power, to prove their fear of humanity had been irrational. But they found calibration, they found what it meant for a species to adapt to the unknowable, to shape itself around catastrophe, without losing what made it moral. The silent revelation spoke again. Not as a ship, not as a mind, but as a chorus of consequence. You believed absence meant weakness. You believed silence meant shame. You believed forgetting us would make you safe, but it made you small. Varkastal did not reply immediately. She did not posture or deny, because there was nothing left to defend with noise. She asked not in defiance, but in cold logic, "What do you want from us?" The stars shifted once more. This time they formed a structure that resembled no ship, no weapon, no species. It was a spiral, an unfolding axis of time, and thought an invitation to remember, to witness, to stop pretending that knowledge of us was ever yours to define. We do not seek empire. We are not your ancestors. Ghosts, we are what came after reason failed. And then in the space above Titan, every orbiting body within, soul realigned without collision in perfect mathematical sequence like beads on a thread, and that thread pointed outward, beyond soul, beyond the coalition, beyond known space, towards something else, something still coming, something humanity had seen and chosen to meet alone. We built this silence as a kindness. We hoped no one would need to hear it. The line of celestial alignment born from Titan's axis did not end at the edge of soul. It extended outward, beyond the gravitational curtain of the Oort cloud, beyond the last debris of human outposts and forgotten probes, into a part of space that had no catalog, no designation, no name. The Vandro's equinox received the transmission first, not through data, but through sensation, a deep wrongness that slithered through the shielding of thought. The coalition knew entropy. They had simulated system collapse. They had modeled black holes and deconstructive waveforms. But this was not collapse. This was inversion. Space itself began to curl at the edges. Not tearing, not blinking out, but reversing like it no longer wanted to be looked at, and behind that curtain was a pulse. Not tyrannical collapse, to one knee aboard. Ocelyn's vow, clutching her chest, not in pain but in discontinuity, as if the very idea of selfhood had been placed under foreign review. Silixtren activated full neuro defense protocols, not for war, but for memory integrity, because what they were facing was not designed to kill. It was designed to erase, from history, from thought, from relevance, and still the Terrans stood the silent revelation. Broadcast no fear, no weapons, no warning, only inevitability. We were the first to see it, the first to hear what silence really is, and we understood too late that entropy has a voice, and it asks questions. From the human figure still standing beyond Saturn, a field of light burst out in radial symmetry, not an explosion, but a disruption, and every coalition vessel was shown a moment. Each officer, each AI, each constructs, saw a vision of their homeworld, not destroyed, but undone. Not war, not plague, not conquest, but unhappening galaxy, not scoured, but forgotten as if it had never bothered to be born. And in that moment the truth became unbearable. The Terrans were not warriors. They were the answer to a question that only they had been cursed to hear. Varkastal, who had not bowed once in her entire service, lowered her head without instruction. Because what she saw in the Terrans now was not supremacy, it was burden. She spoke through teeth that no longer trembled. "What is it?" The Terran reply was slow, not for drama but for mercy. It is not a species, not a fleet, not a mind. It is the entropy of meeting, and it grows in every forgotten corner. They had built the wall not to be feared, but to contain, and now the wall had been breached, not by the coalition, but by time itself, and the humans, the lost, the ignored, had waited not for allies, but for someone to finally see, and now the coalition had seen, and they could not forget. The stars no longer looked the same, not in position, not in pattern, but in meaning. The coalition fleet hovered in silence. No commands, no maneuvers, no calculations, because every course they might plot, every protocol they might invoke, was irrelevant now. Terrans had not risen. They had anchored a species once feared for its volatility, once dismissed for its violence, had become a boundary between all that was and all that could be undone above Titan. The silent revelation opened its final lattice, a geometry so vast and recursive that space around it bowed it, revealed nothing. That was the message inside its heart, was a void, not absence, not darkness, but deletion asterisk. Hollow, encoded with the memories of all they had lost, worlds that no longer had named, civilizations whose DNA had been rewritten by cosmic indifference, and across every coalition vessel the Terrans shared their final truth. We did not win, we did not overcome, we endured. Silixstren stood before the Eidolon archive, once more his posture straight, his voice quiet, his thoughts iron. We should have come earlier, the archive answered gently. You would have failed, you were not yet afraid of forgetting. SOV remained kneeling, not in shame, but in revelation. The realization that the silence they had feared was compassion. Humanity had gone quiet because they had seen the truth, and they knew that if they spoke it, it would drive the galaxy mad. So they watched and waited and built a shield from the ruins of their own fear. Admiral Varkis Tal stood. Lashy had not spoken since the vision, had not ordered a countermeasure, had not asked for retribution. She opened the fleet-wide channel, and for the first time in her life she humbled. We acknowledge not your power, not your strategy, but your sacrifice. And from the Terran figure still hovering in impossible light came the final response, calm, measured, final. Then leave. Do not return, not because we hate you, not because we fear you, but because the moment you forget why we are here, we will have to stand again. The stars aligned one last time, not as a threat, but as a signature, the memory of a species not dominant, but necessary. The coalition ships turned silently, without protest, without confusion, and they left Terran space, not exiled, but pardoned. And across the long stretch of dark, the humans remained at the edge, watching, waiting, holding back a silence that still asked questions, because they were never the gods. They were never the monsters. They were the wall,